Crawl spaces are much nastier than attics. Go in an attic to look for mold. You really want to wear your full face respirator and your disposable coveralls to protect you from the insulation more than anything. Crawl spaces can have sewage, mold, dust, pesticides, bugs. So you want to wear your full PPE. Take your moisture meter, your camera. I put my camera, my moisture meter, my tools in a sandwich bag to keep them clean as I crawl through dirt, and a little kit to take surface samples, a roll of clear tape, small sandwich bags, and a magic marker in case you want to take surface samples, tape lifts to send to a lab of things you think might be moldy. So that you don't have to come back out of the crawl space. You go in there once, when you come out, you're done. So, what to look for? You enter the crawl space, look at the ground, you look at the foundation, you look up at the bottom of the subfloor, especially you go find the bathrooms and the kitchen because those are places where the drain pipes leak and the floor will have mold on the bottom of it. So kitchens and bathrooms. There should be nothing on the ground. No cardboard, no carpet, no scraps, pieces of wood. Wood is food for mold. Quite often, the builders will leave the crawl space a mess. There'll be scraps of lumber, drywall, pipe. The soil should be dry and clean. Shouldn't be any of these white or orange or brown deposits on the ground or the block foundations. And while you're down there, if you see anything like this where the soil looks like it got wet, then look up above for a possible leak from a plumbing or sewer pipe. Could be one from a long time ago, or more often, it's still going on. So here's an example where I went into the crawl space and there were cardboard on the ground to make it soft and easy for workers like plumbers to crawl where they needed. And on the bottom is mold. Cardboard is food for mold. And even if the dirt was dry, moisture's coming up from the ground. There's carpet, just as bad or worse. And you see the scraps of lumber, food for mold. In this picture, the previous owner put lime on the ground. The white stuff is lime in an attempt to dry the soil. A flood or a plumbing leak must have occurred. Now, lime is hazardous to breathe. It burns the skin. So is diatomaceous earth, which is also used in situations like this to absorb the moisture. It too is composed of ultrafine particles that are hazardous to breathe and become airborne when disturbed, meaning when you crawl through it. That's another reason to wear full suit, full disposable coveralls, full face respirator, not a half face and goggles. Go full face and rubber gloves. Nothing should be growing under your house. In this picture, things were dry when I got there, but clearly it was wet at one point. And this is challenging because, in terms of a mold inspection, people always ask the mold inspector, well, did you find mold? If you have wet soil and stuff grew like that, mold had to grow in the soil. You could not go outside and find wet soil in the backyard, in the forest, and not find mold growing in it. It's difficult because a lot of the time it won't be fuzzy on the surface, because to be fuzzy on the surface, there must have been something on the surface in particular, like sawdust or cardboard or wood, to grow the fuzz. Generally speaking, mold is microscopic. You can't see it with your naked eye, so it can be growing in the soil and you're not going to see it. Efflorescence, which can be on the block we spoke about earlier, but you also see the salt deposits, and there will be yellow and brown as well as white. coming off the ground. From a previous, or in this case, an active moisture problem, there's a plumbing leak in this space. Soil should be dry and clean and not have any efflorescence, white or orange deposits from a previous or active water incident. You're probably going to find this without me telling you to look for it. Sometimes it's not obvious what the source of moisture is. In this case, it was a leaky sewage pipe. It's also quite common that you find that there's efflorescence on the foundation. So, couldn't this wet soil be the result of water dripping down next to the foundation and penetrating? Yes, could be both. In this case, you don't see the pipe leaking. It's probably the case that it only happens when someone's taking a shower, running the dishwasher, doing something that's draining a lot of water, and only when it's doing it. The space is pretty wet. That's probably the main drain pipe, and it's probably happening every time somebody uses something that goes down the drain. As you crawl into the crawl space, you wouldn't see it leaking. So what else do we do in crawl spaces? If there's fiberglass bat insulation on the bottom of the floor above, which is pretty common, you want to pull sections down in a few random places and look at the bottom of the subfloor. You only need to do this in a few places. It's not comprehensive and inclusive. The point is just to see, did something happen so bad to grow mold on the bottom of the subfloor everywhere under the floor? If that's the case, then I crawl into the crawl space, I pull some down, I should see it. If I don't, crawl 10, 20 feet down and I pull some down and don't see it, and then I crawl another 20 feet, pull some down, don't see it, there's probably not, the whole floor is probably not affected. This, like I mentioned about attics, where builders like to stuff fiberglass, where the roof meets the top of the wall to prevent outside air from coming into the attic. Attics are supposed to be the same temperature as outside. They shouldn't be cold or hot. Air should be able to move through them. And similarly with the crawl space, what happens, they stuff insulation up against what's called the rim joist. And that's the piece of wood that sits on top of the foundation to frame the house with. Otherwise, it's a cold spot. And I will agree, it's a cold spot. What they don't understand is by pushing insulation up against the outside wall, they're keeping the outside wall colder than the crawl space. So condensation is going to happen because regardless of the humidity, you are literally insulating the outside wall, making it colder than it needs to be, should be. And so you'll find mold there. It's a difficult situation because you do agree with the builder. How do I keep that space warm? The solution for this is rigid or blown in, not the fiberglass insulation bat, because while fiberglass bat insulation is easy to stuff versus spray foam, which is expensive and difficult to install, or rigid foam, which you have to cut into little pieces and you'll never get it cut the perfect size. Rigid insulation or spray foam will work because it prevents the air from flowing. What happens with fiberglass bed insulation is it keeps that surface cold, but the humid air from the crawl space can still go right through the fiberglass and hits the outside cold wall and condenses. When you're in the crawl space, you want to use your moisture meter every chance you get. What I do is I just crawl a few feet. I get the pins. I press them into any wood that I see, the bottom of the floor, a joist, framing. I go perimeter, walk the whole perimeter, crawl the whole perimeter usually. Periodically, I'll just stop to take some readings. The further I get from the entry, the more likely it's going to be wetter because near the entry, that's a place where ventilation, probably not as wet. The further I get down the crawl space, the narrower it gets. Places people can't crawl or go to, those are the places you need to get to. Those are the places that might have leaks nobody's aware of. you should really crawl the whole crawl space around the whole perimeter and then traverse the middle and look especially places where there could be water in the middle, like drain pipes, plumbing under kitchens and bathrooms. So here's some pictures. Here I pulled down insulation from the bottom of the floor. That actually is mold and ice. Here's aspergillus on the bottom of the floor. Aspergillus, like any mold, can be all different colors: brown, black, green, and in this case, the species is yellow. This is an example where the fiberglass insulation was stuffed into a cavity along the rim joist, the foundation. I pulled some out and looked. You can see it's wet. That wetness is not from outside water leaking in. That's some humidity condensing on the cold outside wall. The green mold, if you look really carefully, subtly on the wood, that's a species of penicillin. There's also some alternaria. The mold's growing because the builder stuffed insulation in the cavity, thinking that would help keep the crawl space warmer. But insulation's not an air barrier, and the moist air in the crawl space, due to the ground being dirt, passed through the insulation, reached the outside wall, and condensed. It's similar to how frost sublimates into ice in a freezer that isn't frost-free. Once started, water molecules quickly attach to each other, creating a layer of ice on the surface. Once one molecule of water freezes, it just makes it easier. It's called sublimation. It's how cumulus clouds form. Once there's an ice crystal, all the other water vapor molecules just easily attach to it and freeze as well. The solution: don't stuff insulation into cavities such as these. Use another method to insulate the perimeter of the foundation, rigid foam or spray foam. Basically, you're going to have to consult with the builder in your area for advice. The books by Joe Stiebrick are an excellent resource. Depending on your climate, it's a challenging situation. Here's one that's easier to identify and to fix: mold growing on floor joist. Like the attics, some of this wood may have been installed moldy, but in this case, because you can see the floor joist in the background as well as the foreground appears to have mold, and in the same place, the bottom of the wood. And so there probably is a condition in the crawl space causing it. And it could be one related with the condensation and the cold surface temperatures. Sometimes the solution for this is similar. First, you got to get rid of the mold. And that's not an easy one because it has to be wire brush or sanded. Could encapsulate it. I don't recommend encapsulation. It just pretends you got everywhere with your sprayer, and you're not going to get everywhere with your sprayer. But to prevent it, the rigid insulation installed on the bottom to protect the floor joist from seeing cold surface temperatures is the solution. So look for this is subtle mold growth on joist. And it was hidden by the pink insulation until I pushed the insulation out of the way. That's where your tape lift samples are useful. Is that really mold, or is it just staining? Is it just one spot, or if I do this in a couple other spots, am I also going to find mold? And is it mold or is it staining? Tape lifts. Here's some more aspergillus. Don't disturb it. Spores of aspergillus are really small, and they have a greater efficiency of penetrating deeper into the lungs than spore types like alternaria, or something that's more of a, quote, less toxic, more allergenic mold. Generally, you see mold, you don't touch it. You know it's mold. If you need to take a tape lift, you do it very carefully. Gently stick the tape to the mold, remove it, stick it in your sandwich bag, take pictures, move on. You want to get the inspection done sooner than later, If things look really bad, here's another picture of aspergillus. Even if you don't quote disturb it, if you see that much mold, there's probably mold in the air, and your respirator's not 100% effective. The longer you stay down there, you're going to have to be breathing some. I want to be thorough, but I want to get this done as soon as possible. That might be a time to just get out. That might be a time to call an expert or not. A lot of experts, they're not really going to do that much better of a job. Really, what you need is advice on remediation, how to get rid of it and how to prevent it from happening again. You do want to try to identify what caused it while you're down there. Is it dry? Take a moisture reading. That's useful because if it's dry, that's telling you it happened some time ago. We want to try to identify what caused it so after we remove it, it never happens again. Plus, if we can figure out what caused it, that helps us determine the scope of all where it might be hiding. So take the moisture readings and try to figure out the source of moisture. And then you can probably get out and you probably have sufficient information at that point. Call a remediator. Or we could do a phone consult and you can send me your pictures. Tell me what your moisture readings are. Take lots of pictures. Here's some more pictures of aspergillus on wood. This one is a bit tricky. You got to be looking for the stuff. The wood, the floor joists are clean. It's only this wood nailed to the foundation that has it right there. Use the moisture meter. I will just pull the moisture meter out randomly, even if things look dry. If things look dry, if they look wet, then the moisture meter is just secondary information, just to prove what's wet is wet. You want to check stuff that looks dry because often it looks dry. Often there's not mold visible, but there is mold there. You just can't see it because it's so subtle. And the reason you would know to take a tape lift, check for something that's not visible because it's so subtle, is because it's damp. Take a tape lift sample from the wood because it doesn't look moldy. In that case, if the tape lift shows there is not mold, and you want to take 2 or 3 of them because one of anything's not solid evidence. If, say, you took 3 random tape lifts from the area that the wood's measuring wet, but you don't see mold, and all those tape lifts come back clean, you might be able to conclude, gosh, I'm lucky. I have too much humidity in my crawl space. It needs to be ventilated. I need to fix the ground, pour concrete, keep it drier. No wood is moldy. Or you might find all those samples or 2 or 3 out of them come back with mold. And then very challenging, you can't see the mold to clean it, but you have a lot of mold on the wood. It's just so subtle you can't see it. This is more evident. Clearly there's mold where there's water damage on the bottom of the subfloor from an active leak. The white stuff, that's a fungus, a wood rot fungus. This is a picture, really subtle. Again, sometimes this stuff's you really have to take your time and look for what's different between what looks like clean wood and what's not clean. You see the spidering. Those are the roots of mold, spreading mold, rot mold. More of what to do in a crawl space. Look for plastic on the ground, a vapor barrier. The owner of the building thought it was a good idea. It's not unless it's installed perfectly, which I almost never see. If it's not installed airtight, air is going to leak around it. So it's still going to smell musty in the house, but it's going to trap moisture and grow mold on the soil. And that'd be okay if it was airtight. It's working against you. It's a mold factory. It's like a mold factory with the door open to your house. Look for wood to earth contact. That's generally a no-no for termites anyhow. And the reason for mold that's important is because that means the wood's in the dirt, then the wood is going to get rotted and wet and grow mold. And look for dryer exhausting in your crawl spaces. So here's a picture of vapor barrier. This is why vapor barriers are 98% of the time not effective. They're not installed properly. It's hard to install them after the house is built because there are these piers or supports, and you got to make airtight going around them, which is a lot of work. Mold can grow on the paper backing of fiberglass bed insulation. So anytime you see it in contact with the ground, bad. Plus, rodents like to make nests out of it. Look for anything strange and unusual. So here someone's attempted to remedy an odor from moisture in the crawl space by ventilating it. Now it's true crawl spaces should be treated as mini basements and heated and cooled as if they were a living space, but that's only if there's a concrete floor in the crawl space and a ceiling and it's finished like a mini basement would. They got the idea that this would help. It's not so much that the vent is the problem, it's tipping off a mold inspector. Why are they doing this? There must be something here they tried to fix. And I know that fixes usually aren't that easy and sometimes cause more problems. So it makes me look around and be more careful in my investigation for sources of moisture and what might be causing a musty odor so we can really address them and fix them and not just try to put a Band-Aid on them in a bad way.
Okay, so from where I came in, there's the light. And we have rotten mold on the rim joist. We have a lot of stuff growing on the dirt, on the wood. They've shored this up here. There's a wet spot down